Good evening and welcome to another one of our live podcasts. This is your boy Rolando. We do hope that you have been doing well, and we just wanted to say a wonderful and beautiful evening to you. For those who have continued to listen to our podcast, we just want you to know that we appreciate you, we love you, and we thank you for being a part of the XY Spark family. I just wanted to also remind you that we have officially segued into season two of XY Spark, and we have started to invite all of our live guests, all of our guests who come on our live podcast. We are seeking to stream that live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you ever come on to seek to hear the XY Spark podcast on Podbeam, you might not be hearing it all the live times, but you can tune in on Facebook Live or on YouTube Live, and you will see us, and you will still be able to be a part of the conversation. And so we wanted to let you know that. We also want to acknowledge that May is Mental Health Awareness, and we continue to appeal to all the men who are listeners to our podcast and the ladies too who have become a part of the XY Spark family to just pay attention to your mental health. If you do need to get support for that, we want to say to you, don't be afraid to go out there, connect with somebody so you can get the support to address that mental health, because mental health is not a myth. It's real, and it's impacting the lives of several billions of people across the planet. And we want you to know this. And so we continue to appeal to you to go out there and deal with your mental health, whatever it looks like. Don't let culture stop you. Don't let friends stop you. Don't let family stop you. Remember, your mental health is your responsibility. We want to also remind you that coming up on June the 20th, we are having what we call a March for Men's Mental Health Awareness, June 20th, Sunday, June 20th. We want you to put that on your calendars, please. We want you to support us, want you to watch our social media ads, and you will see what the program is. So far, we have a lot of different organizations who have become a part of this venture that we are planning for men's mental health awareness. And so on June 20th, Father's Day, we want you to put it on your calendar from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We want to do this march. So wherever you are in the world, whoever you are, if you're interested, please send us an email. Email us at hyman@xyspark.info. That's Harry, Yankee, male, alpha, new at xyspark.info, and we can send you some information. We would like you to be a part of this venture wherever you are around the world. We'd love to have you to be walking with us. And if things do not taper off by then, we are going to do it still virtually. We have different places around Alberta that are seeking to be a part of it. Places like Rocky Mountain House with the Friendship Center, Asikoin Friendship Center, McMahon Youth and Community Services. We have groups over there in Toronto, like Men 360, Terrifica Canada as well. And so we want you to be a part of this Men's Mental Health Awareness March that's coming up on June 20th. Please put it in your calendar. Look out for it. If you want to become a sponsor too, we also have that information. We can forward that to you, and we are more than happy to have you to be a part of this. We continue to encourage us to remember that in the end, it all boils down to you and I working together so that we can become the best version of ourselves. For those who are just joining us, we thank you for joining us. We hope that you will continue to be a part of our conversation. We also want you to remind you that we are seeking now to have a new live podcast time, and so we want to be shifting our Saturday evenings to Sunday afternoons at around about 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So please also put that in your calendar. And if you're listening this podcast later than now, we just want to reiterate that our live podcast is going to be moving from Saturday evenings at 8 p.m. to Sunday afternoons at 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. You cannot afford to miss it. We promise to bring you good food, that will help you, empower you, and get you into that space and that place that's going to keep you growing and keep you knowing that those things that you need to do are important and you need to take responsibility for that. And so also want to remind you that next Wednesday, you can't afford to miss. We have a beautiful guest coming to be a part of our conversation, okay, in the form of Emily. Emily Lehman is coming, and guys, I'm telling you, she has a story that's going to knock your socks off, literally. So you can't afford to miss Emily. She's excited to come and be a part of XY Spark. We had last week, believe it or not, we had with us last week a good friend of mine, Lester Green, and he shared a story, such a powerful story. You can go back and listen to that. It's there on our Facebook page, it's there on YouTube. You can't afford to miss that podcast that we had with Lester Green, that was really sharing his experience, how he found himself and what he has been doing differently. And so this evening we want to have a conversation with you. We hope that your conversation this evening, you will find it beneficial and you will find it helpful. And so, in the meantime, guys, don't go away. We will be right back with you after this short intro.
Grief and loss, trauma, mental health, alcohol and drug use, gender roles, anger management, self-esteem, sexual abuse, domestic violence, and the pressures of societal norms are real-life issues that affect men. Join Rolando, psychotherapist, author, life coach, and motivational speaker that has dedicated his profession to working with men to find a healthier alternative to cope and handle these stressors. Rolando believes that men are lacking in social, psychological, emotional, and spiritual support that is necessary for a lifestyle that promotes healthy masculinity. We invite you to join us on XY Spark, where we discuss issues that men face. At XY Spark, we believe the key for happier families is restoring healthy masculinity.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you for staying with us. And this evening, we wanted to talk with you a little bit about telling our story and why it is important for psychological healing. Telling our story and why it's important for psychological healing. You know, I continue to share with you excerpts from this beautiful book that I've been reading, written by Charles Whitfield, entitled Healing the Child Within. Such a powerful book. I was exposed to the content of this book around about 7 or more years ago, and since then I've never forgotten how transformative and therapeutic the content of this book was. And so I just wanted to continue to send a huge shout out to Charles for the tremendous work that he did in putting together this beautiful book, Healing the Child Within. And so our conversation this evening is going to be facilitated through the lens of this book, Healing the Child Within. Now, why I chose to talk about this evening is that more and more I recognize that many of us are struggling with our identities. We're struggling with self esteem. We're struggling with anger. We're struggling with post traumatic stress disorder symptoms because we have not found a safe space to tell our story. We are hiding behind those incidents. We're hiding behind those things that has impacted our lives, and we have not opened ourselves up to tell our story. And so this evening, we are hoping that we will encourage somebody to recognize that it is okay to tell your story. So let's talk about telling telling your story. Why is it important to tell your story? You know, more and more every day as we continue to live, we have all had experiences that has impacted us tremendously. We have had experiences that has caused us to question our place in this life, our place in our families, our place in our professional environments. We have had so many different things that has occurred in our lives, and it has brought us to a place where we continue to question. we continue to challenge, we continue to hold back, we continue to feel insignificant and insecure. And this evening, we're going to talk about why telling our story is an important part of psychological healing. It says telling our story is a powerful act in discovering and healing our child within. It is a foundation of recovery in many groups, in individual therapy, and in family therapy. And so, what we want to recognize is if we are scared, if we are hiding, if we are denying, if we are holding back to tell our story, we're doing ourselves great injustice. It's important for us to find a good place and a safe space where we can go and tell our story so that we can relieve ourselves of those burdens that we've been carrying, of the pain that we've been carrying, of the disappointments that we've been carrying. We want to continue to reach out and connect with somebody who is able to provide a space for us to tell our story. So, what is your story? What have you been holding on to for quite some time now? What have you been holding back on sharing or telling? What have you been hiding from? I want to challenge you to seek to go and find a safe space to tell your story. It says each story contains three basic parts. Each story contains three basic parts. Now, I'd like you to take note of these three basic parts. Each story contains three basic parts. Here are the basic parts. Number one is, or telling your story includes or becomes what we call a part of the separation. So that's the big point number one, the separation. We want to recognize that when I tell my story, I'm allowing myself to separate from it. Sometimes some of the things that has happened in our lives, we have somehow used those things to become the the main foundation of who we are. And so why I like this idea about the separation is that telling our story helps us to recognize that we are not dependent on the incident to survive, but we're actually independent of the incident in order to survive. And why I like the idea of the separation is that when we tell our story, it helps us to externalize the impact and the influence of that and bring us to a place where we are more mindful and more aware that, wait a minute, this is not me. I'm a part of the story, but I'm not the main player in the story. I was impacted by the story, but it does not mean that the impact that it had on my life at the time, it needs to continue. So telling my story helps me to stop living my past in my present reality. Don't you just love that? I love that. So that's why telling our story is important as we talk about that first big point, which is the separation. The next piece, why telling our story is important, is as it relates to the initiation. What am I initiating? You may ask. Why is initiation important? We have to remember that in the end, we need to go through the process of initiation because now we are opening ourselves up for a new plot. Okay? Did you catch that? So we when we tell our story is as if we are relieving ourselves of that to make room to rewrite the script and tell a different story. Don't you just love that? I love that. That has a resonating effect because now I'm recognizing that I now have the skill to do something differently or to reshape the terrain, okay, to rebuild the landscape if you must, and do something differently. And it all begins by me telling my story. That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful, just to know that when you get right down to it, your psychological healing is right there at the beginning of sharing your story. Wow, that is powerful. You see how powerful just speaking the word can be? Do you see how transformative the speaking the word can be? Because first, there's a separation. Secondly, there's an initiation where you're setting yourself up and you're opening yourself up now to write a new plot. I love that idea. So tell your story. Find a safe space to tell your story. Find somebody to share your story. Release it, let it go, turn it loose, and be transformed. The next point is this: telling our story helps for us to return. Return. So there's a separation, the initiation, and then there is a return. Telling our story helps us to return. It helps us to regain. It helps us to recharge and reconnect. It helps us to become, and catch this now, the best version of ourselves. It is so classical and so powerful when we get to that space where we recognize that telling my story is more therapeutic and more transformative than I ever imagined. If, as men, we start telling our stories more, we won't be as abusive as we are in our relationships, because we would have relieved ourselves of those insecurities, of those self doubt. We would have been transformed. If we were telling our story, we would have been keeping so much insecurities and so much doubt about who we are and where we are in our relationship and why we're doing the things we're doing, and why we conduct ourselves the way we do. If we were telling our stories, we would have gained more autonomy. We would have been better partners. We'd have been better brothers, would have been better dads and better grandfathers if we were just willing to tell our story. You see, healing is something that becomes more potent and more effective when we would have claimed the responsibility to do something different from what we've been doing all our lives. And so that's why it's important for us to find a safe space to tell our story. Who can you tell your story to? Who in your circle can you identify to tell your story? Maybe you need to make a phone call. Maybe you need to connect with somebody. Maybe you need to reach out and find someone in whom you can confide. Maybe you need to do a Google search and seek to find a counselor or a therapist that you can connect with to share your story. Maybe you have a close friend that you can share your story with. Maybe it's your mom or a sibling that you can share your story with. But it's important for you to tell your story so that the psychological healing can take place. It says this, catch this. It says unresolved internal conflict is never a good thing. Unresolved internal conflict is not a good thing. Sometimes we have to be brutally honest with ourselves and recognize that there is something that I'm doing that's not working, and I have to take responsibility to change it. Tell your story. In sharing and telling our story, We can be aware that gossip and wallowing in our pain are usually counterproductive. So many times I hear persons say, I'm not sharing my story with you because I want to pity a party, or I want someone to be sorry for me. That's not that's not it. But telling your story becomes a therapeutic process that has a psychological band-aid rather, that when it's removed, the healing continues. So we need to be mindful about how valuable it is to tell our story and share our story. Okay? Grief work must be shared. In sharing, however, there must be no impatience, no censor or boredom with the repetition. In other words, with those of us who are have volunteered to hear somebody else's story, we have to be patient and allow them to express it, even if it sounds like the same thing is coming out over and over again. Telling your story. We want you to understand that internalization and eventually unconscious acceptance of the reality of a loss becomes more and more and more impactful. And so repetition is necessary for catharsis and internalization and eventually unconscious acceptance of the reality of the loss. So we need to tell our story in order for catharsis to take place so that we can gradually and unconsciously accept the reality of that which has been lost. So you see, telling our story is key. Relieving ourselves of those burdens is key. Radically accepting the reality is key. Our story might be traumatic, it might be hard, but we've got to tell our story. It says in telling our story, we talk about what is important, meaningful, confusing, conflicting, or painful in our lives. What do you think about that? Let me read it again for you. It says, telling our story. When we tell our story, we talk about what is important, what's meaningful, what's confusing, what's conflicting, or painful in our lives. You see how important telling our story is? So, what's your story? As you're listening to this podcast, you may be listening to it live, you may be listening to a pre recording, but what's your story? What has kept you back? What has been hindering you in making the impact that you should be making in the community? What has been a deterrent in your growth? What's your story? And so I want to challenge you to slow down and reflect. Reflect right now. If you may be driving and listening to the podcast, but later I'd like you to go back and listen to this podcast again and reflect and think about, what's my story? What has been hindering me? What has been keeping me back from growing and being the best version of myself? What is that thing that I really need to take some time to relieve myself of so that I can grow? What's your story? Remember, and let me reiterate, that telling your story, let me read that for you again. It says, telling our story will help us to talk about what is important, meaningful, confusing, conflicting, or painful. I would encourage you to go find a space and tell your story. Call somebody up and tell your story so that the healing can start happening in your life right away. You know, all of us, we sometimes fall into that space, we fall into that place where we are not uh, willing enough to acknowledge the impact that the things that has occurred in our lives have caused. We're having challenges in our relationships. We're having challenges in the way we view ourselves. We're doubting. We're not hopeful. We're not optimistic. We're not joyful. We're anxious. We struggle with self-doubt. We move away from the norm. We find ourselves caught in a maze of so many different negative things, and we are not recognizing that it could be that we're not telling our story. It could be that we have been hiding from our reality. It could be prime time now for us to take a step back and say, hey, it's time for me to tell my story. I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to remember this. And I reiterate that in order for us to get psychological healing, we have to relieve ourselves of those baggages so that we can grow and become the best version of ourselves. Be honest with yourself, be true to yourself, and go and tell your story. It says here that we risk, share, interact, discover, and more things we risk not discovering when we don't tell our story. When we tell our story, and this is my favorite piece, guys. I need to read this one. It says, while we can listen to the stories of others and they can listen to ours, perhaps the most healing feature is that we, the storyteller, get to hear our own story. Isn't that powerful? So when we go forth and we tell our story, we are benefiting from that tremendously because it is helping us to shift our outlook. It's as if we are seeing the stages of our life flash on a screen like a scene in a movie. All of a sudden, we are seeing it. We're seeing the role that we played. We're seeing how it impacted us. And now we are able to rewrite that script, to rewrite that chapter so we can be healed. And this becomes something that is of utmost importance. And we need to challenge ourselves and keep going so that we can tell our story, we can relieve ourselves of those burdens, and we can start growing and becoming the best version of ourselves. You know, here at XY Spark, we continue to challenge you to understand that healthy masculinity is not a myth. Healthy masculinity is not an overnight process. Healthy masculinity is when every male, every man starts recognizing that there's something that I am doing that's not working, that I need to do differently in order for my life to change. This is why at XY Spark, we have designed a special program just for men called the Masculinity Blueprint that we would like you to connect with us so that we can work with you to be transformed and be changed as you become the best version of yourself. We want you to know that telling our story becomes the catalyst that transform and changes lives and bring us into a new era, into a new realm where all of a sudden we start walking with more confidence, with more hope, with more purpose, with more energy. We become better than what we are today if we decide to go out there and tell our story. You know, what I would say to you that you can also think about doing is, if you find that, hey, there's no safe space for me to go and tell my story, I would say go out there and buy a journal. Buy a journal and start writing your story. Because that's a powerful way to tell your story. Write it down, journal, okay? And use your writing now to relieve yourself of that. Relieve yourself of that so that you can gain the authority and live your best life. So tell your story and make it important. It says, at this critical point, we have a possibility of becoming aware that we have experienced a loss or are suffering and upset. And let me say this piece. And here we can choose to make a commitment to facing our emotional pain and grieving head on. You know, most men, a lot of men today, we have learned to be so secretive about those scars. We have so many different things to use and surround ourselves with. It's like we live within this cocoon of falsehood. We want nobody to know or to hear or to see that this is a part of my history. I'm saying that telling our story challenged us to come out of these cocoons that we have formed. It challenged us to remember that our first responsibility is not to be a man. Our first responsibility is not to be a husband or a father or employee of the year, employee of the month. Our first responsibility is to be human. And if you make this commitment that you are going to be human, then it will be easy for you to go tell your story. When you tell your story, you don't need to apologize to be human. Our journey might have been decorated with many different obstacles that has influenced our psychological health, and it has impacted the way we function. But I'm saying that that change, that transformation can and will begin as we go out there and tell our story. This is your boy Rolando. Guys, we're so happy that you decided to be a part of our conversation this evening. If you do need to connect with us, we just want to tell you, you can reach us. You can go on our website, contactxyspark.com. You can email us at hyman@xyspark.info. You can join our Facebook group for men at XY and you can go back and listen to our podcast as we continue to bring you presentations like these. We also want to remind you that we are going to be changing our live podcast from Saturday evenings to Sunday afternoons around about 4 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And we do hope that you will continue to join us. You can join us live on Facebook and YouTube as well, as we have started season 2, and we do hope that you will continue to be a part of it. We remind you that coming up on June 20th, we have to reiterate that we have a Men's March mental health awareness march. We do hope that you will put this in your calendar, Men's Mental Health Awareness March, to be held on June 20th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the afternoon. It promises to be big. Many different organizations are on board already. But you know, at XY Spot, we before we go, we cannot go before we want acknowledge our mothers. Tomorrow will be Mother's Day, and healthy masculinity is recognizing that because out of women we were born as men, we appreciate you mothers. And we thank you for the work that you have done for us. And we continue to say, we love you, and we wouldn't be the same without you. The world wouldn't be the same without moms. So happy Mother's Day to you, moms, when the day comes. And as usual, this is your boy Rolando on XY Spark saying, guys, you walk good and take care, and we will see you again next time. Have a great night.
Please join Rolando next time on XY Spark as he engages us in practical discussions that promotes healthy masculinity and challenge men to live extraordinary lives. At XY Spark, we believe the key for happier families is restoring healthy masculinity.